Hey everybody, how's it going? I picked up the new Vortex Strike Eagle 5-25 by 56, and as you can see here, I threw it onto the CZ457, of course. Now, I wasn't actually actively looking for a new scope, but when this was announced from Vortex, it really did stir up some excitement, including in myself, and I decided to try one out. I ended up selling one of my Diamondback Tacticals in order to partially fund this, because I can't just go around buying new scopes every other week. That's really hard to pass with the wife, so this was kind of a treat for sure, and the Strike Eagle here has been really nice to use so far. I will be doing a mini range report in this video. I just got back from the range after using this for the first time. I had a pretty good range session, about 2 hours, really putting this scope through its paces, and I am really happy with what Vortex has done here. So the Strike Eagle is a really full-featured scope, especially if you consider the price point where it's at. And I feel like Vortex, every time they come out with a new scope in its price point, they're really making it a very strong contender and almost like a no-brainer option for any given price point. So like with the new or the newer Diamondback Tactical that came out in the last few years, that was obviously a huge step up for a lot of scopes on that price point, and I feel like the Strike Eagle is doing about the same in that $1,000 price point or so, here in Canada anyway. A lot of scopes will have a hard time competing with this, and I think the amount of features they managed to pack into this is really impressive. Looking at the list of features that this Strike Eagle comes with now, I feel like it's almost a budget Razor HD. Just compared, to the Razor in size and features. Obviously, you're not going to get the same glass quality and clarity of image, but really in terms of features, it matches some of the much higher price points in Vortex's lineup. So that's a really cool option if you shoot a Razor on your more expensive setup. If you want a more inexpensive option for maybe a cheaper build, this is a really good option. And not to say this is a cheap scope, this is a fantastic performing scope. I would put this kind of in the mid-range or really high-end entry-level scope for sure. It's going to give most shooters all the features they would want in a scope, if not more. To mount it onto the rifle here, since this was my first scope with 34mm tube, I did have to purchase a new set of rings. I've been using the Pro Series Vortex rings for a lot of my different builds, but I decided to try something else different here, partially because I couldn't find the 34mm size near me in my local gun shops. So I decided to give these MDT Premier Precision Scope rings a try, and I am very happy so far. I think for the price you pay, these are around the same price as the Pro Series from Vortex, maybe a little bit more, but for around the $100 price point, you're getting a lot of really nice machining, and they are quite beefy. They are a little bit wider as well than the Pro Series rings from Vortex, and I really like them. Just something to note, I noticed was pretty interesting. I was kind of just reading the installation on the back here, more just out of curiosity than anything, because I've installed so many scopes, but I'm glad I did, because these rings don't use your traditional crisscross pattern to tighten down the caps. They actually tell you to tighten down the left side first, torque it down to spec, then you adjust your scope to be level and with your proper eye relief, and then you go ahead and torque down the right hand side. And if you actually inspect the bases of the scope rings, they're stepped, so the left hand side is actually higher than the right hand side. So when you torque the left hand side down, there is no gap in the ring. Then you adjust your scope to whatever position you need, and then you torque down the right hand side, leaving a small gap as needed, which is pretty cool. So you don't tighten these in the usual crisscross method. I just thought that was something interesting and worth mentioning. I've never seen this personally in scope rings before, but I'm pretty sure other rings out there probably use the same technique. I know vertically split rings, I have a set of Vortex rings that are vertically split. Generally, you tighten the top of those and then the bottom of those, so I guess this is similar, just in the horizontal plane. Anyway, onto the scope. Let's quickly just go over what comes in the box and the box itself before I dive into showing you the scope up close. The box is pretty nice and is packaged very well. Obviously, it's nicely padded in there. You can see, of course, again, this is the 5-25 by 56. Now, mine is in MRAD. You can get this in MOA, and of course, whichever one you choose, the reticle will match. So this one's MRAD. If you get MOA, your reticle will be in MOA, which makes sense. The reticle, by the way, is the EBR 7C reticle. What I do like about Vortex scopes is once they find a really nice reticle that a lot of shooters like, they don't make you pay more money for that reticle. So it'll kind of trickle down into all their cheaper scopes as well, which is really nice. So this reticle is the same one you're gonna find in the razors. They don't make you pay a premium in order to use their really nice reticle. What does this scope come with? Well, of course it comes with the scope. You do get a lens cloth, which is always nice to have some lens cloths. I always have some of these in my range bag. You do get the bikini style lens caps. These are actually rubber, very similar to the ones that came with the Diamondback Tactical, which work quite nicely. I don't have a pair of flip-up caps for this scope yet, so I am using this. You do get a 3-inch sunshade. You also get this little tool for adjusting your turrets, or I should say removing the caps off the turrets. It's basically just a little tool here, so you don't have to use like a coin or spent casing or something like that. This is polymer, which is really nice, so even if you slip off, you're not going to mar up your turret caps. And you can just throw this in your range bag as well, which is pretty sweet. You also get your little ring to install in your elevation turret, which I already have, but you need that ring in order to utilize the zero stop feature, which the Strike Eagle does feature now. And lastly, something that's really cool is they do include a throw lever, which is something I don't see very often with scopes, to have a throw lever in the box with it. So this is a really nice touch. I think having to buy a throw lever after the fact you bought a scope is just a little bit troublesome, and the fact that they throw this in there is really good because a lot of people will run throw levers anyway, and it's a really nice way to manipulate the magnification ring of your scope. I can't tell, I think it's aluminum, but it's hard to tell. But either way, there's a nice little Vortex logo here as well as on the band. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the physical features of the scope, like the turrets and everything, before I dive into the range report of how I tested the tracking. Now, the glass clarity is going to be hard for me to speak on at this moment because with only 2 hours behind the scope, I don't have enough experience looking through it to really give a comprehensive opinion on the glass clarity. Also, I was only at the 50-yard range today, and of course glass clarity is going to come into play with longer distances and not as ideal lighting scenarios. I will say though, looking through the scope, you can just tell it is nice quality glass. Everything is really clear, and even at the higher magnification ranges up at 25, I was getting a nice crisp image, which you can usually tell lower quality glass gives you a little bit of a fuzzier image, especially up towards the higher magnification ranges. I do plan, by the way, to do a comparison video eventually between this Strike Eagle and the Diamondback Tactical. I know a lot of shooters that shoot with the Diamondback Tactical that are very curious and interested in the Strike Eagle, so I figured that'd be a good comparison video to do, and I'll probably dive a lot more into the glass clarity in that future video. Starting at the back here, of course, you do have your Diopter Adjustment. Generally speaking, I will have to play with this out of the box, as most people do. It is really nice and smooth, and it works well, of course. This is generally a set and forget piece on your scope. Once you set it to your eye, you don't really have to change it unless something happens. When I shoot my support side, which isn't very often to be honest, I don't bother changing it because it's close enough, and I only really shoot offhand very occasionally if a stage of fire in a match requires me to do so, or if I just practice it here and there. Going up to the magnification adjustment ring here, it is really nice and smooth, and in terms of the, I guess, tension you have in the ring, this is basically what I would consider optimal. It's not too loose where it's going to move on you when you don't want to. It is very, very smooth, and something I did notice as well, it has a 180-degree throw. What I mean by that is if you look at this throw lever, on the maximum adjustment at 25 times, it's about at 3 o'clock in terms of the position on the scope, and at the very low end of the magnification, it sits at the 9 o'clock position. So it's a 180-degree throw, which is really nice. Definitely beats like the 200-degree throw magnification levers because it's a lot easier to avoid contact with your bolt handle or anything else that might get in the way with just 180 degrees. It's also slightly faster, of course, to dial in your magnification. So that's a pretty good shot there of the new MDT rings that I'm trying out, the precision, the Premier Precision scope rings. Again, I really like them, and I think the machining on them is really top notch. They use nice large hex screws as well, not the teeny tiny ones that are bound to strip out on you. So big thumbs up for me so far for these MDT scope rings. Going on to the turrets, of course the turrets are something everyone is very curious in. The Strike Eagle has a lot of features built into these turrets. You have the zero stop, but on top of that you also have locking turrets now. So in the down position here, they are locked into place and you cannot adjust the turret. You do have to pop them up in order to unlock them and dial in whatever elevation you need. The Windage Turret is the same thing. It is a locking turret and you do need to pull it up away from the scope in order to adjust your windage. Now, I will be quiet and I'll let you guys hear the clicks because I know everyone loves to hear scope turret clicks on video. The clicks on these turrets I think are really well done. They're definitely much better than the Diamondback tactical turrets, which in my opinion are totally adequate even for shooting matches with, but these obviously take it up a notch in quality. There is basically no mush to speak of between clicks, and as you can hopefully hear, the clicks are really nice and audible and very tactile as well. You basically can't misdial on this thing. Also, the marker does line up perfectly with the turret on both the windage and elevation turrets, so big thumbs up there. It will be interesting to see how these locking turrets do over time, but I know other people who run Vortex locking turrets and they've run them for quite some time and they've had no issues. They still feel good, so I don't really have any concerns there. So the new Strike Eagle here does have a zero stop now, which is obviously really nice for a lot of different shooters that want that in their scope. With the zero stop, you do have to install the ring. It's a little metal ring that comes with the scope. You pop this turret off and you install the the ring, and you have to make sure it's butt up against a pin, and then you reinstall this turret over top. Now the Strike Eagle, without the zero stop installed, the total adjustment elevation range you have is 30 mils, which is quite impressive. That's actually more than the HD Gen 2, which is really impressive in my opinion. But there is one caveat, and that is when you use the zero stop ring in the Strike Eagle turret, it does cap your elevation adjustment. It gives you maximum 19.5 mils above your zero, and it gives you 0.5 of a mil below your zero, just in case you need the extra wiggle room for any reason. You can adjust the zero stop feature to give you however many mils below your zero you want, but you will be directly taking the equivalent amount of elevation off your top end. So what I mean by that is if you want to set a mil or 2 mils below your zero, you can do so. Perhaps you're, for example, sighted in at 100 yards and you like to keep your zero at 100 yards, but you want to dial down for shots at 50 or 25. You can do that, but you're not going to be able to adjust upwards as much either. Now, just the way the zero stop is designed in the Strike Eagle, it does cap your upwards elevation from your zero to about 19.5 mils. So let me show you that now. Right now, this is zeroed out. And if I go all the way to the top where it'll let me, it'll stop around 19.5. So that's 10, so that's 9, and actually it's shy of 19 mils. So it's 18 and 9/10 of a mil, and it's a hard stop. There's no fighting that because of the mechanics, obviously. Now if I dial back down to zero, should be no problem, obviously, and I should have 0.5 mil below my zero, which I do there. Now, the way they designed this ring with the slot, there's a pin that engages in the turret and a pin that engages underneath. And essentially you're turning the ring inside the turret 2 rotations until the hard wall butts up against the pin. So there really is no fighting the amount of elevation you can have with the zero stop installed. Now, I don't think this is going to be an issue for 99.9% of shooters using this scope, because 19 mils of adjustment is still going to get you way out there even if you're shooting 22. And in combination with the reticle, which gives you another 10 mils of holdover markings, you have a total of 30, almost 30 mils holdover there. There is a way around this, and that is to not use the zero stop and to try and mechanically set your scope so that your zero position is as low in the elevation adjustment as possible. So what I mean by this is you would have to purchase either a base with more cant in it, or perhaps a set of rings or a one-piece mount that has MOA built into it, so that you could hopefully get your scope to be zeroed in at whatever distance you want near the bottom of its elevation adjustment and not use the zero stop feature. That would allow you, of course, to have the full 30 mils of adjustment above it without being limited in any way. But again, in my opinion, 19 mils of adjustment is more than plenty for most people. And if you want, you could set this scope to have no wiggle room, to start at 0 here instead of giving you 5 and then having whatever it is, 19.4 mils above it. But that is one caveat with the Strike Eagle zero stop. It does limit the amount of elevation adjustment you have, but in my mind, again, it's not a big deal at all. This rifle has a 30 MOA rail on it, and I'm zeroed at 50 yards. Without the zero stop installed, I have approximately 22 mils of adjustment upwards and 8 mils of adjustment down. Okay, we have one more side of the turrets to look at, of course, the left-hand side, before we look at my targets from today's range session. So the left-hand side turret is actually your controls for both the reticle illumination as well as your parallax adjustment. Now, something very common you'll hear in scope reviews or people talking about their scopes is they don't use the illumination even if it's a feature that the scope has. And I think I'm in the same camp. To be honest, illumination would probably be great for hunting or very low light conditions, but shooting in broad daylight with a nice crisp reticle like what comes in the Strike Eagle here, there's really no need for it, and I think it's a feature that a lot of people ignore. I did install the battery, which by the way does come with the scope. I think I failed to mention that, just to have it in there, but again, it's not a feature I'm going to use. There is no off position between each setting, which I know is a feature some people really like. This one just has linear settings between each position from 1 to 11 in brightness. Even though I'm not going to be using this illumination feature very much, I will say that the illumination does look pretty clean. There's really not that much bleed in the reticle. Of course, if you set the illumination really bright in comparison to the ambient light, you can get some bleeding from the reticle, but if you set it to match, it looks pretty nice in my opinion. Going on to the parallax adjustment here, this is something I'm going to have to get used to because on all my other scopes, I can just kind of reach for the edge of this knob and adjust my parallax. But if I do that here, obviously I'm just going to hit the illumination dial. I almost wish that you just offered the scope without illumination and maybe offered it, you know, 30 bucks cheaper or something, because that way I wouldn't have to go over the illumination knob to hit my parallax adjustment, which is something I use way more. In fact, I think it would have made more sense if they really wanted to keep illumination in the scope to put it on the right-hand side along with the windage. I don't know how the turrets work inside, maybe mechanically that's not possible, but obviously a lot of people hold for wind, they don't dial that. So to get the illumination knob out of the way of their parallax adjustment, which is something you use a lot more, in my opinion would make more sense. But I know a lot of scopes are set up this way, so there must be a reason. Maybe I'm missing something. Speaking of the parallax adjustment here, you do have markings from 15 yards all the way up to 500 and infinity, of course. And it is pretty smooth, although I would say the tension in this knob is pretty stiff. I'm wondering if it's going to break in a little bit, but it is smooth and it feels pretty good. Now, of course, having your parallax adjustment down to 15 yards is really going to attract rimfire shooters that participate in NRL 22, or in my case, the Outlaw Rimfire Precision Series. And that's really cool. You know, a lot of scopes are now offering parallax adjustments down to the lower ranges because manufacturers know the 22 competition scene is really starting to explode. And if you actually watch the Strike Eagle kind of promo video on Vortex's YouTube page, you'll actually see the Strike Eagle on, I think it's a 1022 in that video. So they just know what people are going to be using this scope for. And it's really nice that the parallax setting does go down all the way to 15 yards. Okay, so I think I covered most of the external features of the rifle scope. I'm going to now show some targets and how I tested the tracking of the turrets. Again, I was out at the range for about 2 hours and I was primarily just putting the scope through its paces. Okay, so I just have 2 targets here that I saved from the range. I shot a bunch more than this to test the tracking of the turrets, but I think these 2 are really nice representations of what I was seeing the entire time, which is the fact that these turrets track really nicely. So I do have some footage of me actually shooting this these targets at the range, so I'll probably do like a video overlay. But the first one here is a box test. Now, if you don't know what a box test is, this is a really good initial test you can do with your scope to make sure that your turrets are tracking well and that the return to zero is reliable. So this box test, as indicated here, was done with 4 mil adjustments for each quadrant. So it was 4 mils up and 4 mils to the left, and then 8 mils across, 8 mils down, 8 mils across, and then 4 and 4 to return to my zero. And you can see this group is really nice. Return to zero is reliable, and the groups in each corner are square to each other, and really tight groups too, which is more, I guess, a feature of the barrel. Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and measure this. Since I know this is 4 mils and this was approximately 50 yards, 1 mil at 50 yards is approximately 1.8 inches. So in turn, 8 mils in the length of it at 50 yards should be about 14.4 inches. Wow, mental math is hard. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and measure these now. I haven't done this yet, but I'm gonna just measure center to center. And if it's around 14.4 inches, I'm gonna be very impressed. I didn't laze this out, so I was at the 50-yard bench, but I didn't verify that my target was exactly 50 yards away. So if I'm in the ballpark of 14.4 inches, I'll be very happy. So let's go ahead and line up the center of that group, the center of that. You can see it's about 14.25 inches, so that's good. And just over 14 inches again. Same there. And it looks like it's gonna be the same. Yep, 14.25 or so. So you know what, I'm really happy with this. The turrets are tracking really nicely. This was my initial box test. I did a few more during the day just to make sure it was consistent, and it was, so good thumbs up for the box test here at the Strike Eagle. The more elevation you dial, the better. Obviously you can see my cardboard was almost running out of space for 4 mils, so that was the max I could do. But if you have like a really big target, you could try 6 mils or whatever. You could also bring in the target as well, closer to you if you want to dial in more adjustment. The next target here I'm going to show you was 3 tests basically in one, elevation, adjustment. What I actually did with this board was I actually measured this before going to the range. So again, 1.8 inches is approximately 1 mil at 50 yards. So this 10 marking here is 18 inches up. So I know if I'm aiming here and I dial 10 mils and I aim here, my bullets should impact somewhere close to this line, which you can see it did. So what I did with this target here was I started with a 2-round groups. I think these are all 2-round groups. 2 rounds here. I dialed in 2 mils, and of course I'm always aiming here. I shot again, and you can see here My 2mm mark is exactly where the rounds hit, which is perfect. Then I dialed in 5mm here, which is 9 inches, and it hit basically where I was expecting it to, and then 10 right there. Now again, it might not exactly be on the lines because I didn't verify the board was exactly 50 yards from me, but again, I'm very happy with this. Then I jumped over to this line here and I started opposite. I did 10, 5, 2, and then back to 0. And you can see one of my return to 0 shots was right in the little diamond in the middle, so I'm very impressed with that. Then I went to the center line here, and what I did was a very similar procedure. I started at the bottom here, 2 rounds, and then I proceeded to do 2 rounds up, dialing in a mil between each group. So 1 mil, 2 mil, 3 mil, 4 mil, 5 mil. And what I'm looking to see here is the distance between each group is consistent. And as you can see here, you do see a nice pattern, as well as all the groups are roughly on the line. Now, when you're hanging a target up like this to do an elevation test, you want to make sure that your line is plumb, because if the line is canted to one side or the other, it'll look like your scope is tracking off the center, but you want to make sure that this is obviously hung straight and that you're shooting your rifle when it's level. And as you can see here, it's nicely all on the line, as well as you could expect it to be anyway with some human error. And then my return to 0, I verified with a 3-shot group right back there. Elevation is perfect.
This federal ammo anymore. Why?
So these 2 tests, the box test, which I'm a really big fan of, as well as this elevation test here, are a really good indication of how your turrets are going to be tracking. Again, the more you can do, the better. If I had a big long piece of cardboard, I probably would have pushed it out as far as I could go, but 10 mils was just the amount of cardboard I had space for. In all my shooting today, the Strike Eagle was tracking very, very nicely, and I shot multiple of each test. These are just some examples that I had left. Let's go ahead and wrap up the video. Initially, I'm very impressed with the scope. I think it is a huge value offering here from Vortex, especially in the price range. It's going to be hard to beat. It's a very strong contender with everything you get in the package, as well as obviously the VIP warranty. It's almost a no-brainer, but a little bit less so than the Diamondback Tactical, in my opinion. The Diamondback Tactical is dollar for dollar, probably the best bang for your buck you're going to get in a rifle scope. But the Strike Eagle here, for about double the price of the Diamondback Tactical, is just so feature-packed that it's really hard to pass up. Again, it's almost like a budget Razor HT Gen 2, in my opinion. You have a lot of the similar features and almost like the same feel to it, if you will. You have the locking turrets. The clicks are really nice and audible. You have a zero stop feature now that the Diamondback Tactical was lacking, and you do have illumination if you use that. The glass clarity, as I can tell so far, is really fantastic. Even on the higher magnification range, it looks very nice and crisp. And the biggest thing, all these features are great, but it would be, it would mean nothing if they don't track properly. And as you can see with my box test and elevation test, they are very promising turrets and they track really nicely so far. Again, I do plan to do a comparison video in the future between this scope and the Diamondback Tactical, probably when I have a little bit more time to really put the Strike Eagle through a few more scenarios. But stay tuned for that if that's something you're interested in. So far, again, I'm very pleased with the Strike Eagle. I think it's worth every penny. I paid full pop for it and I'm still very happy with it. It's really good value and you're not going to find a more feature-packed scope in the price point. I think it's going to be really hard to beat. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. I hope you found it informative and I will see you guys in my next video.